Okay, so I want to show you really quickly how to submit your assignment. Again, if you look at the way, I'm going to show you a couple other things really quick, but if you look at our class assignment for that's due today, it should walk you through and tell you what I'm hoping you'll do with it. So it's the Photography as Research Tool Part 2. And this was where I'd ask you to go out and reshoot the stuff that you saw, that you found on your cell phone. And so this is the whole shooting part right here. So then what I wanted you to do was to take your images from Lightroom into Photoshop, save them as a layered smart object Photoshop file or TIFF file, either one. Name them again, first name, last name, assignment number, image number, whatever, and bring that. I ask you to bring that tonight onto a hard drive. So what is due tonight are the 5 images exported to Photoshop and saved as layered Photoshop files. And it says here the assignment files are too large to submit via Canvas. Instead, completed assignments will be turned in via the Digital Lab server. And so what that means is, for those of you who are on the computers that are here in the lab, it's the you go to your dock down at the very bottom, and it's the little cube, the little white cube that's got the blue apple on it. If you click on that, it will take you to the Digital Lab server. On that server, you should find a thing that says Class Projects. Inside Class Projects, there's a folder that has my name on it, Engelhard. Inside that is a folder that says Dropbox. You want to drag those files and throw them onto this Dropbox. That's how you turn them into me. So what I'll do is, if you go ahead and do that now, that'd be a good idea. And you can't see inside the Dropbox. You guys don't have access to it. You can put files in there, but you can't take files out of it. So if you put in the wrong one, let me know. I'll get rid of it so you can put in the right one. Otherwise, I will put this up sort of right when we get back after the break, so that everybody can check to make sure that their files are there. And if they're not there, we can figure out what went wrong. So, but are there questions about where this is going? Are we good? Okay. Is Photoshop files or TIFF files, either one? Say what? Yeah, shoot. Putting them in a folder is really nice. Yes, that would be really great. I would name it exactly the same thing as you're naming the assignment. So again, your last name underscore, first name underscore, and the assignment number. It just won't have an image number with it. Okay. A couple of things just so that people know about this. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of this. Some of the people, most everybody who submitted stuff last week, the two files that I was asking for that actually make up your Lightroom catalog, most people got that part correct. There was a couple of people who didn't. There was occasionally I would get a file that was just the database. Occasionally I would get a file that was just the previews. You need both parts. If you don't have both parts, I can't open anything. I can't see anything. So if you're still confused about that, please find me during the break and we will get that part worked out. There are some people, so for the people who did that, I did not penalize you. I put a comment in on the assignment saying that I was putting it on hold. I wasn't giving you a grade for it. I was putting it on hold to wait till you figured this out. It was our first assignment. It was our first submission. So I'm giving everybody a little bit of latitude here. However, you do need to get it into me. Otherwise, if we get to the end of this class and you still haven't put in something that I've got on hold, you'll end up getting a 0 for it. So just so that you know, I just want everybody to get that part. Max, this is just a special note to you. You are not using the most current version of Lightroom, just so you know. It doesn't matter. For me, when I go to grade your stuff, it just upgrades it to my version. I just thought you should know. That's all. It doesn't make a bit of difference what version it is. This whole versioning thing is driving me crazy. But anyway, thanks, Adobe. Okay, with that being said, I had promised 2 weeks ago to actually talk to you guys about backup strategies really quickly. So I want to point something out, and then I'm going to show it to you really fast. If you go to, I've added another resource to our website. So if you go in and look at the resources for session 3, which is tonight. So if you look at the resources here, again, remember resources have everything to do with what we are trying, the information that we're trying to get through here. So I was asking you guys during the course of this coming week to actually read through this material here about curves and rendering intents and that kind of stuff. But what I've got down here under support, these would be, tonight we're going to try to deal with the last stage of color managed workflow. We're also going to deal with printing. Hopefully you guys did bring some printing paper. I'm trying to spend as much time as we can at the end of our class in the lab actually printing. But there's other things that are in here. There's guidelines that are in here. There's the Photoshop CC tool palette. There's a bunch of stuff that's in here that, again, I'm not really necessarily wanting you to read as much as I'm going to show you how to build a soft light dodge and burn layer tonight. Some of you guys may remember that and never have to refer to it again. But if you want to use it and you don't remember how to do it, this was a PDF that'll show you how to do it. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about in support here. But at the very bottom down here is a backup overview. It is an exhaustive article about backup strategies, and it's worth looking at. I don't go quite as far as these guys go here, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you I'm going to show you my backup strategy. So anyway, I just wanted you to know that that part was there. Okay. So for backing up, so are there any questions about this? You guys know where to put those files? We good on that? Okay. So I know I ask this question every single time, whatever. How many people in this room religiously back up their files? How many people here religiously back up their files to more than one backup source? Why? Okay. Oh, so you actually back up to the cloud, right? How many people do back up your work to the cloud? Okay. Just so that you know, there's a guy, he's probably the #1 stock photographer in the world. His name is Seth Resnick. He had 6 terabytes. He had his entire library up on some online server, and he got an email from them on a Friday afternoon saying, "We're going bankrupt and out of business. You have until Sunday to get your stuff off of our server." He had to download 6 terabytes of data in a day and a half, 2 days. He couldn't do it. He lost it all. Not all of it. He lost half of it. Just so you know. Okay. No, and that part's good. So when you say your hard drive, do you have an external hard drive as well as an internal hard drive? So you have 3 copies of your file, right? You think so? Okay, yeah, that's the problem. We're going to try to get away from that. Other people, other backup strategies that you have that you think are really good. Shoot. Okay. Okay, so when you say 4 hard drives, so you have a primary drive, like probably the one that's in your computer, right? Okay. Right. Okay. So it's like an external guy, right? So you've got a copy of so you only keep your working files on your computer then, right? And then your archive is on this big box, right? And then that big box, you have copies of it, or is that it? But I mean the big box guy. If you were to lose the big box, would you lose a big part of your archive? Where's the backup for that big box? The back of the big box. And where are those physically? Right. So they're all in the same room, right? Yeah. So you burns your house down. All your shit's gone. Somebody comes in and steals all your shit. All your shit's gone. You have a malicious roommate that decides they're going to overwrite it or introduce a virus into your whole system. All your shit's gone. So we need to think about backing up as not just having a second copy of a file. We need to go a little bit deeper with that. But what I do like and what it sounds like is that you've got software that's actually dedicated to doing the backup, because that's the biggest problem that we run into in the beginning is that the copy that you made is not viable. So that's what I'm going to show you guys right now. So to make a viable copy, I have actually got an external hard drive plugged into my computer right now. And I'm simply going to pick a file that's somewhere on my computer that I am just going to use it to copy something with, but I want to do something relatively small. I'll find something on my, okay, yeah, this will be fine. I'll pick something on my pictures folder, and it's going to be pictures of my house. That's my house. I know, right? Sorry, I'm just looking for a view from my house. Yeah, that's the view from my window. That's sick, isn't it? Yeah, kind of. Okay, so at any rate, so this is a folder that's sitting on my desktop. I'm going to create another copy of this folder on my external hard drive because the software that I use, you want to have source and destination. So I'm going to just simply click on this. If you hit the return key on a Macintosh anyway, it will actually select the name for you, and then you can just copy it, Command C. Then I'm going to go over to my external hard drive. I'm going to double click on it. And then inside that hard drive, I'm simply going to build a new untitled folder, paste in the folder that I'm actually talking about, and then these are the two that I want to mirror one another. So you can see the one on my hard drive is empty. The one on my computer that's on my internal drive in my computer has got like 4 files or 6, 8 files in it, something like that. So at any rate, this is the software. I am not in the business of selling software. Because everybody in this room knows that one of the ways that you could do this would be, I'm going to get rid of this guy for 1 second. You could simply grab this guy right here and drag it over to the other folder and let go, and you've got a copy of it. How many people in this room copy like that? Well, if you don't copy like that, how do you copy? Yeah, everybody copies like that. I'm going to get rid of all the files that are in that copy because that's not a viable way of doing it. The reason that isn't viable is corruption can occur in that transfer. As you are actually going across this wire to go out to this hard drive, that data can get corrupted. And did you know? No, you don't know. So most people use dedicated software to make these copies. And that software, you can set the software up to actually check to make sure that what you asked to be copied over was indeed copied over. Make sense? So I do not sell software. I'm not in the business. I don't get a kickback from this. The program that I use to use this is called ChronoSync. It is what, in the Macintosh world, it is what everybody uses. It's what all the professional places uses. It's what every digital tech I know uses this program. Don't quote me on this. You'd have to look up the price. I think it's like 40 or 50 bucks, but you get a lifetime license. I have owned ChronoSync for 15 or 20 years. Never once have they hit me up for a price increase, and they make a big deal about it. So you pay them the money once, and you will own it as long as they stay in business. They constantly update this program. They're really on top of their game, just a really smart group of people. So at any rate, I'm going to do a very, very simple version of a backup here. This is incredibly complex software. You can actually set it up to do very simple duplication like I'm going to do right now. You can also set it up to do extremely complex series of duplications. So if you have a really complex structure, file structure, it can take care of that. You can set it up to schedule so that it works automatically in the background. You can set it up so that it does not just go between your hard drive inside your computer, but you can also do it. You can sync to Google Drive. You can do, it's an enormously complex program. We're certainly not going to look at every single part of it tonight, but we're going to look at what I think is the most important issue with it. So I am going to simply create a new synchronizer task. That's what this button is about. And this thing's going to come up, and I'm going to call it. I've still got that. File name or that folder name on my clipboard, so I can just paste it in, and I'm going to call it that name backup, and say OK. It's then going to ask me to pick the target that I want to actually do this with. So I've got a source target on this side, and I've got a destination target on this side. So I'm going to click Choose to navigate to my source target. And that source target is in my Pictures folder on my internal hard drive. And it's this thing right here called 1201 South Prairie Photos. And I'm going to say Select that. And it pops up right here and selects it. I'm going to then say the destination for this guy. So the destination for this guy, again, I'm going to click on that to choose it. I'm going to then navigate to my external hard drive and pick the folder there, the empty folder there that has the exact same name. and I'm going to select it. But then we need to configure this. You can see right now that it's set up to do left to right, basically from the source to the destination. There's a whole different series of things that you can pick here of options. You can synchronize back and forth bidirectionally. So when I had a studio in New York and a studio here in Chicago, I would ferry folders back and forth on a laptop. So right before I would leave Chicago, I would do a synchronization to get my laptop and my desktop at home to be the same. I would go to New York, I would plug in my desktop there and my laptop and do another sync there, and all three then would be completely mirroring one another. But anyway, so just so that you guys know, there's an enormous amount of stuff that you can do here. How many people in this room have ever tried to back up their boot hard drive, their startup drive, and had it not work? If you drag and drop to copy your hard drive that starts up your computer, it will miss half of the invisible files inside, and your copy will never be able to start your computer again. So if you are doing that as a safety, which I do, it won't work. You can use this program to create bootable backdrops. So it's just, again, it's an invaluable program. But the thing that I wanted to show you is this exists for just the setup part right here. In the options, and this is where this is where it matters to us. In the options, you will see this thing right here that's called Special File Folder Handling, and right now it is set to Basic. You can actually set it to the next one down, Basic with Verification. And you'll see that it actually clicked another check mark right here that's saying Verified the copy data. You can click on and do custom, and all of these things become available to you. But this is the one that you really care about, is this guy right here, verified copy data. What ends up happening is this. Digital files are gigantic, and they have a very specific count of the bits of data that make them up. But the number is so gigantic, rarely would you ever run into two files that had the exact same number for pieces of data. So what ends up happening in this verification, they call it bit-sum verification, or checksum verification, what's going to happen is that it's going to look at all the files on my source, and it's going to add up all of those unique numbers and come up with some gigantic grand one number. It's then going to make the copy over to the hard drive, to my external hard drive, and then it's going to do the exact same addition there. And if those two numbers match, you know your data is it still has its integrity. It was all copied correctly. If that number is 1 point off, then you know that something didn't go right. Now, this won't necessarily tell you what file didn't go right. It'll simply tell you, though, that your copy is not valid. So at any rate, you would set it up like this and say okay to this. Now we can do a trial sync on this, and it'll show you what's going to happen. And this will sort of help illustrate what's happening here. It's going to take all those files that were on the left side, and it's going to move them over to the right side. In this, you will also, if we were going in two directions, it would say if we were going to move files back in another direction, it would give you conflicts. What conflicts are files that exist in both places but have different timestamps. That's considered a conflict. It'll also show you, because you want your backups to mirror your primary drives. And what that means is that if you delete something on your primary drive, you want to delete it on your backup as well. So this will show you any deletions or anything else that have happened. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and say synchronize to that. It happens really fast. That part is done. It says, okay, it was complete. There were no errors encountered. It took me 4.6 seconds to do that. If you then go out and look in the Finder, this was my original right here, where these I don't know, however many photographs are in there. There's 7. And then you look at, this is my copy that's actually sitting on my hard drive, is right here. And the exact same ones are here. Does that sort of make sense? Okay, so that took 4.6 seconds to do. I'm going to actually duplicate one of these files. So I've just added a copy. When I go back to do my synchronization a second time, it doesn't recopy everything. It's only going to recopy one file. So you'll see the synchronization setup. If I do my trial sync again, it'll show you that the only thing it's going to move over is that one copy, because that's the only thing that has changed. So your backing up becomes extremely fast. And this becomes an issue for us. How many people here have got an internal hard drive that's a 0.5 terabyte or a terabyte or more? and you go to back that thing up, and all of a sudden it wants to recopy the entire terabyte, and you're just like, shoot me in the head. All I did was put one little JPEG on it. That's the only thing I've added. Does that sort of make sense where we're going with here? So at any rate, that part all matters to you. Are there questions about this? Are we good on this? All right, I'm going to show you one last thing here really quickly. So this is the PDF that I put out for you that really has this whole discussion about backing up strategies, primaries versus backups. So they call it the 3-2-1 rule. That's the way most people think about it. And just to give you some idea of the threats that could possibly befall you that you need to protect against. Device failure. Everybody's in this room has had it. How many people in here have ever had a hard drive fail? How many haven't? You will. Guaranteed. If your hard drive fails, you need to find me. I've got a really good record. I've got a track record of about 60%. And I actually open hard drives up and unfreeze the heads off of them, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, but it's actually worked. It's better than sending, well, anyway. So device failure happens to everybody. Viruses, it can happen to everybody. Malicious damage, you've got your significant other, you just broke up, and they are pissed, and they take a hammer to your hard drive. Volume and directory glitches. How many people in here have ever had a hard drive that just all of a sudden became unreadable? Yeah, what'd you do about it? Oh, there you go. Never mind. There's software that you can actually use to fix that part. Transfer corruption, the thing that I just showed you, avoids transfer corruption. Lightning strikes and voltage services. How many people in this room have how many people have a desktop in here? A desktop computer? Okay, so the rest of you guys are on laptops? Okay, laptops function, the little power brick for your laptop functions as a pretty good voltage surge protector. The desktop, though, needs to have surge protection because, again, lightning strikes your electrical lines. It comes into your house. Things that are connected directly to it that are sensitive, it can just burn them up. Fire or water damage. How many people in here have ever had a house fire? I have. I had a studio burn down. Oh, actually, the studio didn't burn down because that implies there was no structure left. The studio caught on fire. And then the fire department came and they put hoses on my studio. And it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. And they thought they had the fire out, so they all left. And about 3 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, the fire started again. So they came back and they put the hoses on it again. And that lasted until about 6 o'clock. Then they left. 7:30, 8 o'clock, fire happens again. They come back and they turn the hoses on and they leave it on for like half of a day. So I walk into my studio and it is pouring down rain in my studio. Everything is soaked, drenched, wet, everything. All my film, all my computers, all my gear, equipment, leather couch, everything just soaked. If you hate somebody, do not kill them. Burn their house down. It's worse. Okay, life cycle. How many people in here know that most hard drives only have a lifespan of about 3 to 5 years? They fail. How many people in here know that the DVD that you're burning that you think is a permanent record of your computer files? Everybody, how many people think that DVDs are permanent? They're not. About 10 years for a DVD. So life cycle. You get into this whole thing and you find out not only in your backup strategies do you have to be backing stuff up, you've also got to cycle your media. So what was your backup that was working for 5 years and it worked great? You've got to think about phasing that guy out and getting a new one in to replace it because sooner or later that one is going to fail as well. How many people in here who do have offsite backups on different machines know that you have to start those machines up every 6 months or you run the risk of them losing their magnetic charge, which again will corrupt your data? Am I scaring you guys enough yet? There's so many ways you can lose your data. It's ridiculous. So at any rate, this is what a lot of people will do here. I don't necessarily agree with this backup method here, and for a reason I'm going to show you right now why. They suggest that when you're shooting, and this is a typical scenario where you would be shooting to card, that the very first thing that you do before anything happens, that you actually create a backup of that on a hard drive. Now, for me, I typically do this on my primary, on my internal hard drive in my computer. They suggest not. They suggest that you go to a hard drive first, then copy that into your computer, and then make a second backup of that guy. Because their feeling is that they're nervous that the transfer of information from here to your computer first runs the risk of another kind of corruption. So, at any rate, the point being is that you need 3 copies of your data. So one copy would be on your primary, what you're using. Another copy would be on your backup that sits right next to your computer. And the third one is on your secondary backup, which we need to be offsite. So what does offsite mean? Offsite means a safety deposit box. Offsite means your office. Offsite means you trade hard drives with a friend. It just means that you get a copy of your data away from all the copies of your data that you have. Because again, if your house burns down, somebody steals all of your gear, it's all right next to each other, whatever, you lose everything. So this is basically the sort of the scenario that they work out here. And that's as deep as I'm going to get into doing backups. They also get into doing stuff on Write Once Media and all sorts of things in here. I think that that's a little excessive, but at least you'll have some idea of what we're talking about. Yes. Yes. The only cloud service I would trust is Google. Yeah, they're the biggest player, and of all the players, the last one that if Amazon were to actually open up their servers to us, they would, in my opinion, even trump Google. But Google, hands down. If Apple I know does theirs as well. They're both really big players, and the likelihood that you wouldn't have some warning that was getting to be iffy. Yeah. Okay. And that's pretty much all I got for you. Are there questions about this? Okay. Really quickly, I need everybody to jump into Photoshop for me, if you could, please. I'm going to find a file that's also on our server, so if you can go look at that server where you just dropped your file again. So again, on the class projects, and I just want everybody working on the same file. And we did the Bruce Fraser DNG thing last week, didn't we?
Yes, sir.
Wasn't that fun? Let me see what's on this first file.
Oh, dang it. My Photoshop does not look
That doesn't sound good. Oh, can you guys still find the sensor profile, CR2 file that's on the... Oh, wait, don't use that guy because people couldn't copy that. They couldn't get it off the other one. Do you guys still... hang on. No, people have been trying to copy stuff off of this server and they can't get it to copy. So, let's try... Let's try the Bruce Fraser one. So do me a favor, go to the server. If you can grab the Bruce Fraser file, that's the one of the castle, and drag that onto your desktop, and tell me if you have a problem if you get an error message saying you can't copy it. Did it work for everybody? Okay, I just want it's not like I really have this passion for this file. The guy who took it he's dead now, unfortunately, but an amazing guy, but nonetheless. Okay, so double click on the DNG. It should bring you straight into Photoshop into Camera Raw. We're not going to do any color corrective work on this. We're not going to do anything else with that. What I do want to know, though, does your little button down here say Open Object, or does it say Open Image?
Open image.
If it says Open Image, again, it simply hasn't been set up. If you want to permanently change the setup so that that button does read Open Object, you click on the hyperlink that's at the very bottom of your screen. It opens up this workflow options, and you check the box right next to Open in Photoshop as Smart Objects. However, if you want to take the shortcut as well, simply hold down the Shift key and that button will change. If it is dedicated like mine is to Open as Object, holding down the Shift key gives me Open Image. But if you set that up in the link where I just showed you, it should say Open Object, and go ahead and click Open Object, and this should bring it into your file as a Smart Object. So we are good about this. Did we talk last week? We did talk last week about true cloning, didn't we? Where you had to copy, if you wanted to make a copy of this file, you had to go up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, down to new smart object via copy. If you simply were to drag this guy right down here to make a dog-eared copy of it, then anything that I end up doing on one file, you don't need to do this with me, I'm just going to show you, on one layer ends up happening to both layers. Which again is sort of defeats our purpose. That is because these things are true clones of one another. However, I'm going to go back to when this thing just opened up as a smart object. And we are going to make a copy of this exactly the way I just showed you. So to do that, well, first off, let's do this. If we do a quick tour down here, did we talk about any of the tools in the toolbar last week? A couple of them. I want to just do a quick tour of this just so everybody's sort of familiar with what's going on. There's now this annoying habit that if you hover over any of the tools long enough, you get this like video play that tells you what's going on. And I guess that for when you're first learning it, that's a nice thing to have. But if you've been working in this for a really long time and these things keep popping up, they just, I don't know, anyway. I should be more tolerant, shouldn't I? Oh, there you go, because you just didn't want any of this shit? Yeah, okay, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. So at any rate, the next thing down is a select. So the first tool up here is a move tool. And what that'll do is, let's go ahead and make a copy of this guy. We'll make an independent copy like we should. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, new smart object via copy. It puts a second one up on there. You know it's highlighted because it's got this sort of lighter gray. This layer is a little bit highlighted. So anyway, this is the layers palette. I need to make sure everybody's aware of that part. So this part right up here is the highlighted layer. So anything that we do is going to actually happen onto this layer. So the first thing is the move tool. So if you click on that and then click in your image, you'll see that you can actually move this thing around. You get a pretty good readout of what's going on right here. If you turn the eyeball of the layer that's on underneath, the one that is the base layer right there, you'll see that you get this checkerboard thing. And as you move your file, you can see the checkerboard. The checkerboard is the way Photoshop illustrates transparency. So because I've gone outside, I can get my image to line back up again so that it sits in there. But the minute I pull it off and move it away, there's nothing, there's no information here. There's no image here. So this is how Photoshop illustrates transparency to you. So you can move it back into place, and you'll see as you sort of get close to bringing it up in that corner, it should snap to. It's just a behavior that Photoshop actually has. It makes it easier to sort of get to back where you were. The next tool that's down is the rectangular marquee tool. If you click on the lower right-hand corner of that tool, you'll get a flyout menu that allows you to do a marquee tool, an elliptical marquee tool, a single row, or a single column. I want you to pick the elliptical marquee tool up at the top, the rectangular one. And what that allows you to do, if you come over into your image, you can simply click and drag, and it will create a selection in your image that is rectangular. If you hit Command D, it will deselect that. If you can't remember Command D, come up to your select menu, and it will be right here, deselect. You'll see it's grayed out to me now because I don't have an active selection going. But if I click and drag out again, there is a selection going right now. You can see it's right there. And again, deselect will actually get rid of that. If you hold down the Shift key when you click and drag out, it will constrain the proportions, so you will always be drawing out squares. There's other keyboard shortcuts that we will get to later in class. We're not going to deal with them tonight. Command D to deselect that. I will show you the elliptical marquee tool. If you select the next drop down and click and drag out, you get ovals. Again, if you hold down the Shift key, it will constrain those so that you get perfect circles. Command D to deselect that. The next tool down is another selection tool. We're not going to talk about this guy right now. It's basically the lasso tool is how most people would work with it. I'll show you the other options later on in another class. But with the lasso tool, you can simply freeform a selection. To change a selection or to modify it, if you hold down your Shift key, you will see that you get a little plus sign right next to the cursor that allows you to draw this stuff. You can then add to a selection, and you can continue to do that as long as you hold down the Shift key. If you hold down the Option key, it gives you a little negative sign next to that. This allows you to actually subtract areas from your selection. So you can see that in this case, I'm removing parts from my selection. Command D to deselect. The next tool down, again, if you click on that drop down, is where you get to the quick selection tool and the magic wand. So the quick selection tool is what we used last week to create the selection of our sky. So again, what this thing is going to try to do is locate an edge. So it's also got artificial intelligence built into it so that as you click and drag, it starts to try to anticipate the area that it thinks you ultimately want in the end. So watch what happens to my cursor up here. I'm going to start to click and drag, and you'll see that before I even get into the middle of my screen, it will already pick up the whole rest of the sky. So I'm going to click and start to drag, and as I'm coming over and I get to here, and then all of a sudden it goes, I don't have to complete the selection. Again, that's the artificial intelligence that's built into this. Command D to deselect. What I've told you before is the big mistake. If you make your selection tool too big, as I start to make a selection, I'm going to click, but I'm going to cross the line that is the horizon. And now as I start to click, you can see it's not trying to find that the next line it's trying to find exists somewhere down here in the grass because I've crossed the line that I was getting it, hoping it would actually pick for me. So again, Command D to deselect. The next tool down is the crop tool. We are going to do that tonight. This is how you would rescale your imagery depending on how you can. How many people in here always only shoot and print full frame? It's okay. You can own it. There's a huge movement, has been forever in fine art photography, that the image that you shoot is your image and that therefore it should be printed full frame, that cropping shouldn't be allowed. What a bunch of bullshit. The next tool down are the eyedropper and various measuring tools. Eyedropper tool, if you click on the eyedropper tool in the beginning and then click like on the castle, you'll see that it makes your foreground color whatever you sampled. So it's a color sampling tool. You can resample on the grass. That is now the color of the grass where I just sampled, or the green of the trees that are in the back. That's what that tool is about. There are other tools in here that we will get into later on for other reasons. The next tool down is the clone stamp and healing brush tool. For those of you in this class who are in the 3-4 game in Photoshop, you know what this is all about. For those of you who are not, don't worry, we get to this later on, but these are basically retouching tools. The next tool that's down is the brush tool. If you click and get the drop fly out menu on that, again, I'm clicking on that little triangle that's on the lower right hand side. The first tool is the brush tool. The next one down is the pencil tool. It just has to do with the quality of the point of that. The pencil tool is very hard and very small. The brush tool can be hard and small, but it can also be very large and soft. So I want you to go ahead and pick the brush tool right now and come over, and we're going to actually paint on this smart object layer. So I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. If you can't remember that, it's the little icon that sits right here. You can click on that one as well. It'll also default foreground and background colors to black and white. The X key will actually flip your foreground and background colors back and forth from one another, or the little double-headed arrow guy that's down there will do the exact same thing. So with a brush selected, that's what this is called. The shortcut, for those of you who are into shortcuts, you'll see on my little drop-down menu that the shortcut is just the B key. So if you hit just the B key, you'll have the brush. And I'm going to try to paint something on here, and it says, the smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit contents will no longer be available. Do you want to rasterize this smart object? So the next thing you need to know about smart objects. Smart objects are inherently protected, which means you can't paint on them, you can't clone on them, you can't, all the retouching tools are unavailable to them. All of that kind of stuff is off limits to a smart object. However, there are times where we want to be able to work on an image. So I'm going to go ahead and say cancel to that. Where we want to be able to work on a version of this image. So right now you can tell both of these are smart objects. However, you can turn this, I'm going to do it to the top one. You can turn this top one into a stupid object, which will allow you to paint on it. So to do that, I want you to come up again to the layer palette, down to smart objects, down to rasterize. It's down at the very bottom. And when we do this, watch my screen when I do it. I want you to watch the little icon right over here when I do this rasterize. I'm going to go ahead and say do a rasterization of that. It now has disappeared. It's no longer there. If I double click on this thing, I don't go back into my raw data. I don't go back into camera raw. That's all gone to me. Now it's still alive on this one down here, but it's all gone to me in this one up here. If I hit the B key to paint on this guy, I can come in and I can actually paint with this really well, although mine is set to...
Wait, how do you make a new, like another layer?
Okay, so starting right back in the beginning, I've got my original smart object. That's what you've got, right?
Yep.
Okay, so up to layer, down to smart objects, new smart object via copy. Now this second one again is a smart object. If I double click on it, it opens up, it's in camera raw. I'm going to cancel out of that. If I go up and rasterize this though, up to the layer menu, down to rasterize, down to smart objects, down to rasterize, that little icon goes away and I can now paint on this guy. So I can paint my black brush on it. I'm going to undo that, Command Z. I'm actually going to go after the clone stamp tool. And again, for those of you who don't know this tool, don't worry, we get into retouching in a couple of classes from now. But I'm going to hold down the Option key and sample right here, and I'm going to paint another castle right over here in this area right here. So that's basically what's going on here. All of this stuff is available to normal layers, but it is not available to a smart object. So for instance, if I turn this off and I go back and click on my smart object again, the layer that's underneath, and try to do that same clone stamping move on here, I can't do it because the smart object is preventing it. The smart object is protecting my file. Does that make sense what's going on here? Okay, so does everybody, okay, we didn't talk about this last week, but you have 50 stages of undo in Photoshop because that's how we set Photoshop up. So have you guys made some sort of mark on your rasterized layer? Okay, so I need a paint mark on it, or I need a cloned castle, or I need something. I'll do both on mine. I will do a paint mark on mine. Okay, so with a paint mark on mine, if you hold down your Command key and hit the letter Z, it will undo your last move. If you hit the letter Z again, it comes back because removing the paint mark was the last move. So if I undo it, it comes back, and this will just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth the whole time. You're just going back and forth between those two states. If you want to travel further back in history, you hold down the Command and the Option key and then hit the letter Z. That will take you back one step that gets rid of my paint move. If I hit it again, that gets rid of my first clone move. If I hit it again, it's the second clone move, and so on and so on. If you can't remember that, everybody, has everybody got their retouching screen up like mine? Have you got your workspace so it looks like mine? Info on this side, history right here. Does anybody not have that? Okay. You can do the same thing in history. You will see over here that in your history, if you scroll up to the top, it's tracking everything that we've done. It tracked here at the very beginning, because I haven't done more than 50 states. It's got here where I opened the smart object. It's got here where I made a copy of it. It's got here where I moved it around. Down here at the bottom, it's got where I did the brush tool work. It's got the clone stamp work that I did here. You can go forward and backward in history. So to move forward, I'm going to go back to where I not only had cloned the castle on, but I'd also done the brush stroke. And you can see you can bring all of that part back. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, so it's just basically how undo sort of like works in this world. However, I am going to go back in history to the point where I just rasterized that smart object, and you can see that right now all I've got is a version of the file that's a smart object and one that is a dumb object. Everybody in the same place as I am. Good. We're going to transform this file. We're going to transform just this layer. Now again, we're going to get more into transforming later on, so we're not going to spend a lot of time doing here, but I'm just trying to show you essentially what's going on here and why this whole thing matters to us so much. Okay, we're going to transform this. The keyboard short for transforming is Command T. If you cannot remember that, you come up to the Edit menu and you can come down to this flyout menu right here that says Transform. And you'll see that you've got a whole series of options that you can scale your image, you can rotate it, you can skew it, you can distort it, you can do a perspective warp on it or a regular warp on it. You can rotate this thing 90 degrees, you can flip it horizontally and vertical. Those are all your the options that you have on that. But I'm going to say we're just going to scale the image. So come down and hit scale. If you did hit Command T, what you should notice is that you'll have a little square box that sits up in each corner. You'll also have one that sits right in the middle, and you'll have another one that sits over at the side. Your options palette up at the top will also have changed. And what happens up here, and this is true of all the tools that we actually work with, depending on the tool you select, you will get options to modify that tool up here. The thing that we've got up here that we are going to use to modify is basically width and height. You can change these things a number of ways. So for instance, I need everybody to do this with me. Come in and I want you to simply select, just drag across the value that's next to the W. That W stands for width. Right now it says 100%. If you type in 50 instead, you will see that your image, its height remained unchanged, but its width is now half half of what it was. If you want to keep the proportions between width and height the same, it's this little chain link that sits right between width and height. If you click on that, you will see that it also changes your height in that direction. Now, dragging across these things and typing in values, so I'm going to type in another value, I'm going to type in 45, is one way of doing it, and you'll see that it changed my width to 45 as well. Another way to do it, and it's the way that I instinctively work because I like to watch stuff visually, is if you hover your mouse over either the W or the H, it does not matter which one you hover it over, you will get a hand that's got two little arrows that are pointing both left and right. That's called a scrubby slider. If you click in and drag in one direction, you'll see it makes your image smaller and you'll get a live readout of it. If you drag back in the other direction, the very same thing happens. You can go beyond 100%. That would actually be enlarging your image. But for our cases right now, I'm going to let go of that. I'm going to drag across either the width or the height, I don't care which one, and I want you to put in the 5, just 5. We're going to do 5%. If you hit the way to go ahead and accept the transform is you've got two options. Number one, if you hit your enter or return key, it will actually complete the entry that we were trying to do there. It was missing that little percent sign. However, this has not been transformed yet. You would have to hit the return key a second time to actually go ahead and commit that transform. The other way you can do it is by clicking on this check arrow right here. If you are in this box and you want to get out without doing anything, you click on the little circle that's got the slash through it. But in our case, we do want to reduce this thing down by 50%, so I'm going to do that. It's actually made my image really small. It's really hard to even see it's in there, but it actually is right down there. If you turn off the eyeball on the background layer, you'll see how small the thing is that we just made. So what we just did was we just crushed that image by 20 times. We went from 100 to 5%. 5 into 100 is 20 times. So it was a 20 times reduction of this image. We're going to transform this guy again. We're not going to go back in history. We are going to re-transform. So to do that, Command T brings up the transform dialog box. Click on the chain link between the width and the height. You will notice that we have now readouts in here that again are at 100%. You need to click across one of those and change it to 2002, 1, 2, 3 zeros. The reason we are doing 2000% is we had a 20 times reduction. Now we're going to do a 20 times enlargement. And again, simply click on the checkbox next to it and you have got one fucked up image. Transforming is destructive on rasterized layers. Does this make sense to you guys? We good on this one? Okay. We're going to do one other thing on this guy. I am going to go back in history. So back in my history state where we have that history that says rasterized smart object. I'm going to click on that to go back to my state. So now I've got the rasterized version that's not fucked up from the transforming. But I'm going to run a filter on this guy. I'm going to come up to the filter and I'm going to come down to blur. And I'm going to come down to Gaussian blur. So everybody look up at my screen and see where I'm at. I'm going to blur this layer. Everybody good with me? So again, up to filter, down to blur, Gaussian blur. And let's really smack this mother. Let's go ahead and give it a blur of 300 pixels. That looks good to me. And say okay. Because I've decided, fuck this photo thing. I'm going to be a fine artist from now on. And this is my new look and my new style. And it's really actually, I'm kind of loving it. It makes my image acquisition a whole lot less onerous than it used to be. I don't really have to worry too much about what I shoot. Yeah. Right? No, not at all. Oh, yeah. It's just banding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's more your screen than it is anything else. Okay. So, I would call this also destructive, wouldn't you? Pretty much so. So I'm going to say, let's not undo this. Just turn it off. And go back and highlight the original smart object. So on the original smart object that's sitting down here, we're going to do those same exact moves again. So with, again, the top layer eyeball is turned off so I don't see it. I've made the bottom layer that still is a smart object and it is protected. I've made this guy, I've highlighted it, I've made it the active layer. You can tell it is because it's got the lighter gray on it. We good on this? Okay. Transform, Command T. Click on the chain link between the width and the height. Drag across either one of them and put in 5 for 5%. I do return keys instead of the check mark, but that's just me. If I hit the return key once, it puts in the percent sign for me. If I hit it the second time, it does the transform. And we're back to the same problem. We've just crushed this image. It's a little bitty thing. I'm going to do the reverse now. I'm not going to undo it. I'm not going to hit Command Z. I'm not going to go back in history. I am going to retransform and enlarge it. Command T to do that again. But you'll notice that unlike the rasterized layer, this guy now remembers that this was a 5% reduction. It remembers what the transform was. Because what we are really looking at is an illusion. It's not what happened to the image. It is the illusion of what is happening to the image. So to, again, change it back, click on the chain link between the two, drag across it, put in 100%. Hit the enter key once, hit it a second time, and we do not have a fucked up image. We've actually got a beautiful image that was not ruined or screwed up because it is a smart object. It was protected. Does that make sense to you guys? We're going to do one last thing here really quickly. We're going to come up to the filter menu. We're going to come down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and we're going to do that same 300 pixel blur, and I'm going to say okay to that. And my image now looks like it is fucked up, but look what's underneath it. There's this thing underneath it called smart filters. Underneath that smart filter, you've actually got a little tag on it with an eye next to it that says Gaussian blur. These are smart filters. Because you cannot do destructive work on a smart object, what it does is this is giving us the illusion of that Gaussian blur. But if you turn the eyeball off on the Gaussian blur, it goes away. Does that make sense? If you turn it back on, it comes back. Now, I want everybody to save this file, or it's already on your desktop, so I want everybody to close this file right now and save it when you close it. So I'm simply going to click on the close button. It's going to say, do you want to save that? I'm going to say, yes, do save this. It's going to ask you, do you want to save it as a PSD, and where do you want to do it? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to throw mine in my TOS folder. You guys can put yours wherever you are. You don't need to worry about it. This is not homework. You're not going to have to turn this in. But that image is now gone. We're going to then open it right back up again, up to the File menu, open Recent, and go right to that file again, open it back up, and it opens back up again. Now, how many people in here can tell me what blur you did on that top rasterized layer? It doesn't say it underneath that. All of that information is gone. Not only that, so I can't, number one, I can't fix it. I can't change it. I can't undo it, whatever. But all that information is gone to me, right? I don't remember that I did a 300 pixel blur. But double click on the Smart Object Gaussian Blur Smart Filter. If you double click on that, it comes right back to what you had put in, the value that you had put in. So by using smart objects with smart filters, all of this stuff is actually maintained. Does that make sense? So what you will understand about me in editing in this class is that I never, ever, 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 ever want to do something in a permanent way that I cannot undo. Because sure as you are born, you're going to do something, and tomorrow morning you're going to get up and take one look at it, and you'll go, fuck, that is the ugliest thing I have ever done, and I really wish I could undo it, but you can't because you went and committed all of these things in a destructive workflow. So the difference that I'm trying to illustrate to you here now is that working with rasterized layers like this one up at the top is a destructive workflow. working with this guy down here with smart objects is a non-destructive workflow. So for instance, you can actually drag that blur to the garbage and it is gone. This smart object has not been touched. Does this make sense to you guys? Okay. This is how it works, and this is the way I need you to think of it. Image. Okay, vote right now. This is one image. Image 1. Image 2. Which one do I like better? All the ones. Oh, you guys didn't even fucking look at the pictures, did you? Or you all are up for the number 2. Okay. See? Ones. 2. Okay, well then when I say ones, vote for 1. So all the ones. Ones. I've got 1, 1, 1. Okay, and then all the 2s. Wow. Okay. 2 it is. Okay, so this is my image. You need to think of a smart object as it's a container. I always think of it as an envelope. So what's happening, what's going to happen is that I'm going to take this image and I'm going to put it in this envelope, in this protective envelope. Now, I can do all sorts of things to this envelope. I can make the envelope look smaller. I can make it look bigger. I can do all sorts of things to it. But the image that's inside is protected. It's untouched. Nothing is happening to this guy. Does that make sense? So as long as it stays in here, I cannot really fuck it up. Are we good on that? That's what working with smart object parts is all about. Are we good for that part? Okay. The next part's going to get confusing.
We can do it.
I know, we can do it. Okay, so I want you to throw away the top layer that we made. Get rid of it. You should only have a smart object left. If you've got the smart filters underneath it, throw those guys away as well. If you can't remember any of that, you can actually go back into your history palette and simply go back to, oh, you can't get back to open, never mind, because we've already closed this image up once. So I need to make sure everybody is back to just a single smart object. Is everybody good on this? Okay, we are going to make another copy of this. We're going to duplicate this guy. So I'm going to come up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, down to new smart object via copy. In my copy right now, if I were to double click on the copy, the second one that I've made, it brings me into Camera Raw. It is a copy of my raw data. Does that make sense? Show me. Oh, okay. All right. So let's click. You're back in this guy. Tear the tabs apart so you have both. Guys right here. All right, because you've got more than one image that's actually going up in here, I think. Go ahead and throw this top one away, and you can do the same thing. Throw the top guy away, get rid of it. Good. And then again, we're going to make a copy of this guy. So up to layer, smart objects. Perfect. And then double click on the top one. Oh, yeah, that's okay. You're okay. What you're seeing is okay. Don't worry. Don't worry. But you can see, because you're in Camera Raw, right? No, you're not in Camera Raw. You need to quit Photoshop. Both of you need to quit Photoshop. Hold down the Command, Option, and Shift key, all three, and start Photoshop. And then say yes when it says, do you want to reset the preferences? And then go to the top under Window. Oh, yeah, you can let go of the, Workspace and do retouching. And then open that file again. You hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and start Photoshop. No, you've lost all that. So just double click on the file. Yeah. And say open image. And then duplicate it via the layer. No, it's supposed to be just like it is. That may be our problem. It doesn't look like it's a smart object anymore. No, that's what you need to do. Just drag that on top of Photoshop. Okay, and then hold on your shift key because you need to open this as a smart object. And then up to duplicate it. Way down over here. Oh, you can let go of the keys once you've said to do that. Yeah. Are you good? Okay. Okay, guys. Sorry. Okay, so if you double click on the second one, you can see that we went right back into Camera Raw because that is a copy of our raw data. Does that make sense, everybody? Are we good on that? Okay. This is going to get a little confusing now. This will be the worst I throw at you, hopefully, tonight. I'm going to hit cancel out of here because I didn't make any change in it. So I'm going to convert this. I'm going to rasterize this. So again, make sure that we're working on the top layer, the second of the smart objects, up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, down to rasterize. It makes this thing a normal image. This is just the way a normal, like in the old days, when you guys you were to actually output a file, if you were to export a file outside of Lightroom as a JPEG or whatever, we call those baked files. This is a baked file. Now the one underneath it is not. The one underneath it, if you click on the layer that's underneath it, that still is a smart object, you'll see you go right back into Camera Raw and you can screw around with the data. But if you double click on this guy, it opens up this layer style dialog box that doesn't have anything to do with anything we can really work with at this stage of the game. So is everybody got this scenario situation going? We good? Okay, this is the confusing part. With the top one selected, come up to the layer menu again, down to smart object and over to convert to smart object. And you'll see you get that little layer thing back. However, you do not get your raw data back. All I have done now is this. I took a baked file, the pretty one. I took that baked file and I put it in a protective envelope. That's all I did to it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's not my raw data anymore, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just 1 second. So I need everybody to change a preference in Photoshop for me right now to keep this from being confusing. This is another reason I don't use tab behavior in Photoshop, because what I'm going to show you right now is going to get very confusing. So up to Photoshop, down to Preferences, over to General, and then come down to Workspace, and uncheck Open Documents as tabs, and uncheck Enable Floating Document Window Docking. If you don't like unchecking this stuff and don't want to work that way, you don't have to, but I want you to do that for where we're at right now. So then I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. So it looks like these things are identical, but they're not. If you double click on the one that's down on our top layer right now, the one that it started as a smart object, but then we rasterized it, then we made it a smart object again, what you'll see happen is this. It actually opens up. What just happened was I've got this protected smart object. I just then pulled this file out of it. It's sitting in a separate window, this window right here. You'll see I've only got one layer of it. It is not a smart object. This guy I can actually make changes to. So we are going to make a change to this guy. We're going to flip it. That's what we're going to invert it. That's what we'll do. Hold down the Command key and hit the letter I. It'll invert your image. And then click on the close box, the little red stoplight guy. And it says, do you want to save this? Say, yes, I do want to save that. And you will see that your image now, this top smart object, looks completely different. Again, what I did was, as long as this thing had stayed a smart object and was in there, it was fine. But I actually pulled it out, and I can edit this file. I can do destructive stuff to this because I took it out of its protective case. And then I stuck it back in. Does that make sense?
So when you stuck it back in, you got rid of raw data?
No, when I first rasterized it is when I got rid of the raw data.
Okay, yeah.
That's when I lost the raw data. Does this make sense? So I'm going to show you a more practical way to think about this, I hope. So follow me on this one. Okay, I'm going to go back in history just one step, and that was when I actually had inverted that guy. So with my smart object, right now I've got, imagine this is the castle. I've got the castle that's sitting inside of here. We're good to go, right? Okay, so with the castle sitting in there, I'm going to do a transform again. I'm going to turn off the eyeball on the bottom one so you can see it. So I've just turned the eyeball off, but the top one is still selected. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. Click on the chain link between width and height. Type in 5%. Hit the enter key twice, and I've got a really small little castle. But this is a smart object. It's not a smart object based on raw data. It's a rasterized image inside of a protective smart object. I'm going to do the same thing again. Transform, Command T, and bring this guy up again. Click on the chain link between the two. Enter in 100%. Hit the enter key twice, and it comes back, and nothing happened. I did not destroy my image at all. Does that make sense? We're good on that, right? Just like we did before. However, if you double click on this raw data, on that top layer, again, what I have just done, you'll see you have got 2 copies of this image now. This is the file that was inside that protective smart object. I have just pulled it out now, and I can work on this guy, right? So I'm going to do the transforms on this. This is not a smart object. You can tell there's no little thing in the corner. Command T to bring up the dialog, the transform dialog box. Click on the chain link between the two. Put in 5%. Hit the enter key twice. It makes it really small. Hit Command T again to bring up the transform dialog box. Click on the chain link between the two and put in 2000 to get it back to its original size. Hit the enter key once to put that in, and a second time to actually perform the transform. Click on the close box and save that. And what just happened is I just destroyed the image. I pulled it out of its protective covering, out of its smart object, and when it was out, I could edit it, and I just fucked it up. Does that make sense? Who have I lost? Yes. At what point did I lose you? Okay, so double clicking. Let's go back in history. Go back in history to where you can see back before all the transforms. Just convert to. Okay, convert to smart object. So this has no longer got raw data in it, but it's still a smart object. It's still protected. It's still sitting inside of this guy. So I can do all the things in the world to this. Hit your paintbrush. Hit the B key. You'll see you can't paint on this guy. It's a smart object. It's protected, right? But if I double click on it, I actually pull the image out of its protective covering. You're double clicking. You're not double clicking on the icon. Close that guy up. Double click on the icon, not the name. Yeah, it's no longer a smart object. So go back in history and go back to rasterized smart object. Go to convert to smart object. That's where you need to be. That should be a smart object. Now double click on the icon, and that has just pulled it out. Does that make sense? What's going on here, guys? The reason this is going to matter to us, again, this is the answer to non-destructive workflow. Are there questions about this? Other people, who else did I lose and why? Where and why? We good? Okay, don't worry, we're going to work on this a lot. It'll come. All right. The layers palette, we've actually looked at it pretty good. What I'm going to ask you to do now is you can close that up. You can throw away the second layer. We're just going to look at the bottom layer right now, just a single smart object. For that matter, it doesn't really matter what you have in this guy. I just want to go through the layer palette and talk about the bits and pieces really quick. So we already talked about the garbage can that's on the side. If you had more than one layer, you could simply drag your second layer, your third layer, fourth layer, whatever, down into this garbage can. It gets rid of them. If you click on the little dog ear guy that's right next to it, it will add a blank layer. And you can do things in this blank layer. Again, if you turn off the eyeball on the smart object that's on the bottom, you'll see that that blank layer is the checkerboard. The checkerboard, again, is indicating transparency. There is nothing on this layer. You can paint on this layer, though. So again, if you hit the B key to get your paintbrush, you can actually paint on a blank layer. If you turn on the eyeball of the smart object underneath, you can see that layers stack on top of one another, and then they combine. So whatever you're seeing is a combination now of both. Areas in my top layer that are transparent are showing me the castle underneath, but areas here where I've actually done the paint work on it are hidden. So I need everybody doing this with me. Don't just look at this screen. Yes.
When I click like new layer,
yeah,
it brings back like the deleted copy or something.
Close that guy up.
What's this?
Don't save it. Right. So on this layer right here, when you click on this add blank layer right there.
Oh, right here.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So does this make sense, guys? What's going on here? If you click and add another layer on top of this and hit your X key so that you're painting with white instead of black, and you paint across that, you'll see that again, it is now covering the area that it's not only covering the area of the castle, but it's also covering the area that was the black that I had painted, because right now the white layer is the one that's on the very top. Does that make sense? You can change the layering order by dragging and dropping. So for instance, in my case right now, the white one is on the very top, but I could drag, I'm going to click on the layer itself, not the icon, but the layer itself to make it active. This is one in the middle right now that's got the black on it, and I'm going to drag it up on top of the one that was white, and I've just changed my layer order now, and you can see that now the black is sitting up on top of the white. Does that make sense? We good on that? So layering order matters in all of this. Are we good on this part? As we continue, as you guys continue to work, certainly by the time if you get to me and retouching whatever, you can end up with images. I had a student once that had an image that had over 30,000 layers in it. It was his entire semester project. 30,000. Yeah. Tell me about it. He did really beautiful. Actually, you know, I think they still have it. The big photograph that's over on the wall over there, that's the moose blowing the bubblegum bubble. Yeah. It's his. Now that wasn't the image that was 30,000 layers, but it was a beauty image that was 30,000 layers. That's an undaunting number of images. So there needs to be a way to manage images, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So I need everybody to do this for me, please. Come over. If you look at your image, we're going to start at the very top one. In my case, the black one's on the top right now. We've already talked about the eyeball and what the eyeball does. Makes perfect sense. We've also talked about the image and what this image does, and you can tell it's active because it's got the little brackets around it. If you continue to work your way to the right, you can actually come over, and it says, in my case, mine says layer 1. If you double click on that, and I mean you've got to click right on that name. You can't click on the icon, you can't click on the layer to the right of it, but right on that little name, you can highlight it and you can rename it. And in my case, I'm going to rename mine black. I'm going to do the same thing down on the white layer. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call it white. And so it makes a huge difference to start getting into naming your layers and in terms of just the organizational part of it all. Does that make sense? We good on that? Okay. I am going to select multiple layers. To do that, the white one is active right now, but if you hold down the Shift key, you can actually select multiple layers. So I've now selected both the white layer and the black layer. You can tell both of these are active now. With both of these active, I'm going to come down here, and it's the third icon across. It looks like a little, it looks like a little folder. It's for a group. If you click on that, it actually put both of those into a group. This group is just a folder. If you click on the little drop-down menu of that folder, you can see that they're sitting inside there. You can actually double-click on the name and that says Group 1, and you can change that, and we can call this, I'm going to call it black and white line. So B and W lines. And hit the Enter key. It'll put it in there. This can now collapse and open again. It also has an eyeball next to it. So if you click on its eyeball, it turns everything that is inside of that group on and off. Does this make sense? Are we good on this? You can drag things out of a group. So for instance, you can come back in. I'm going to grab the black layer right now, and I'm going to drag it up to the top. And sometimes this gets harder to do than not. So I'm going to drag it in the other direction. I'm going to drag it out of the group going down to the bottom. So I'm going to drag it till it's just on the top of the castle layer and let go, and it's still inside there. So I'm going to drag it underneath the castle. So now it's sitting completely underneath the castle. I'm going to collapse the black and white line group, and then I can drag, I can actually drag this back into the group like that, or let me drag it back out again. Hopefully I can drag it up above it. Yeah, and now the black is sitting up above it. Does this make sense what's going on? This is all just about very simple organization, structure. We good on this, right? Okay, there's a couple of things that you need to know about. So I want everybody to select their black layer to make sure that it's on there. There's some locks that exist up here at the top. So it's right above here. It's called lock. If you click on the first one, this is called a transparency lock. You'll see that it gives you a little paddle lock on the side, and this guy is highlighted, but it is only highlighted for this one layer. So for instance, if I go back in and click on my white layer down here, you'll see that the little the illustration of that transparency being locked is not, because I haven't locked my white layer. I've only locked my black layer. But with the black layer locked, again, I can go, I'm going to hit the B key to go to a brush. I'm going to hit the X key to get black, and I'm going to try to paint more black on it. And you can see that no matter what I do, it doesn't do that because I have locked the transparency. I have said you cannot touch anything but the transparency. However, if I hit the white key, I'm going to hit X to go to the white key. What you'll see now is that as I paint across the black, my transparency is locked, but the black was not transparent. So it will not add anything to the transparent pixels, but it will change the non-transparent pixels, which are the black ones in this case. Does that make sense? We good on this? Is this working for you guys? All right, Command Z to undo that because I want to keep these somewhat intact. If you hit the next lock over, the next lock over will actually lock the pixels instead. In this case, you will see with the brush selected, you get that same circle with the slash through it. You cannot paint on this image no matter what you do. It doesn't matter what color it is. You've just said, I'm locking this so that you can't do any more pixel work on it. We can still do other things. We can move shit around, but we can't do anything else on it. The next lock over is the motion lock, and you'll see right now I've got a pixel lock is still on and a motion lock both. So I can uncheck the pixel lock, I can uncheck the transparent lock, and I can only have the motion lock on right now. With the motion lock, I can actually paint on it, but if I hit the move guy up here, I cannot move it at all. And it tells me I can't move it because it's locked. This is a good thing when you're actually trying to do multiple layers of retouching and you need everybody to stay in register with one another. This actually becomes an important lock to have. The next one over, I have no idea what this is all about. The next one over is a lock all. If you click on lock all, you will see that you can't do anything to this guy. You can't move it. You can't paint on it. If you hit the B key, you can't do anything to it. It is simply completely locked down. You can also click on it and undo the lock as well. Again, it goes back in stages. Motion was the last lock that I had on, so I'm undoing that. So now I can do anything I want to this top layer. I can paint on it. I can move it. Are we good on this? Okay, the last thing I'm going to show you while we're in this area right here is this, opacity. If you click on the opacity slider up here, again, if you hover over the name opacity, you'll get the scrubby slider. You can click and drag down and it will start to fade, and it is an opacity thing. You'll see you can start to see through the image. It's not that it just makes that black a gray. The gray is actually transparent, and you can start to see through to the trees and to the other stuff that's actually in there. And you can also see that it's doing it to both the black and the white. So that's what that's all about. Are there questions about this? Alrighty, guys. A couple of the stuff that we need to get through. We should be in good order here. Yeah. If you've done all this, you can throw the black layer away. You can throw the black and white lines group away. And we're back to our single smart object. Is everybody good on this? Okay, how many of you guys in this class, when you're in Lightroom, have ever worked with curves or levels in Lightroom? How many have not? So you guys all feel pretty comfortable about curves and that stuff? There's two things to know about curves in Photoshop. And the first one is this. If you come up to the image menu, so up to the top image, down to adjustments, you'll see you've got Brightness, contrast, levels, curve, exposure, vibrance. You've got a whole bunch of stuff up here. I want you to pick curves up here. And it'll open up a dialog box, and we can change the curve on this. So again, just to recapping curves, basically what they are is this is a way to remap tonality. So the way the straight line part of the curve is what it's saying right now is for every level of tone working from black on the bottom up to white, I'm mapping it to the exact same tone going from the bottom up to the top on the left. So the white point is being mapped from here to the white point here. So everything in is the same thing as everything out. Everything is equal. So if I start, have we talked about the tonal scale in Photoshop being 0 to 255 yet? We need to have that conversation right now. Sorry, hit cancel out of here really quick. Come over to the foreground color and simply click on it. It'll open up the foreground color picker. When you get the foreground color picker open, you simply click on the foreground color. So right here, and it doesn't matter whether it's black or white, we're going to put in a different color. So did it come up? Okay. With this up, you will see that there's 4 sets of possible values that you can enter. These are all interrelated. The top one is HSB. The second one down is RGB, which is red, green, blue. The one over here is LAB, which stands for luminosity, and then 2 color axes. And, or is it axis? Say what? Probably, right? And then CMYK on this side. But we're only going to work in RGB right now. I want you to click on the red radio button that stands for R. I want you to come over and drag across the 255 that is in the red radio button right there. And then I want you to hit the tab key. It will move you down to the green value, and I want you to put in 0 for green, and then hit the tab key again and go down to the blue and put in 0 for blue. And with the red radio button with the little check next to the R, this column becomes the red slider. This is every value of red that you can have in an 8-bit file. We haven't talked about bit depth in this class. Did you guys ever talk about bit depth in Photo Practice 1 or Foundations? Nope? Okay, so we'll talk about bit depth later on. But at any rate, what 8-bit is telling us is that we have 256 possible reds, but I only see a 255 in there. How did I get 256? 0 is a value, right? So I'm going on a scale from in reds. If you click on the double-headed arrow that's up at the top and you drag it all the way down to the bottom, you will see that you have a black in there. There's no color in there at all. You can also see your readout here is 000. That is actually a 0 red. It's a 0R. As you start to click and drag this up, you'll notice that the value of the R readout in here is it's just changing. And as we go up here into this mid-range right up in here, 128R would be a middle red. It's a middle brightness. It's a pure red, but it's only a middle brightness. As I go all the way up to the top, I end up with a pure red. Does that make sense? So in Photoshop, what they do is it's a scale always of 0 to 255. So it doesn't just happen here. It happens in everything. Did we talk about any color theory in this class at all? Didn't we see the slide where I said to you guys additive color, and we said if you have equal values of RGB, it always equals gray? Yeah, we did have that part, right? Okay, so we're going to look at that. But first, I want to try this with the greens. So drag across the red value, the 255 there, and put in a 0. Hit the tab key and put in 255G, which will be for green, and then click on the green radio button right there. And you see you have the exact same scale. You have 256 possible tones of green. And then finally, if you click on the blue channel, 0 out the green and put in 255 for the blue. That is your blue scale right there as well. You've got 256 possible blues. So in our world, an 8-bit world, the way that you guys will mostly be working is you have an image that's made up of possible 256 reds, 256 greens, and 256 blues. Does anybody have any idea how many colors that'll make? 16,700,000 something. Because you multiply the 256 times 256 times 256, and that's what you end up with. And that's how our color is generated. So this scale of 0 to 255 makes sense to you guys, right? However, we've said also in this class that if you have any color that has equal amounts of red, green, and blue, by definition, that is a neutral gray. And we can see that as well. So if you type in 0 for your blue, you have a black. Now, most people say, well, black isn't a gray, but a black is a gray. So if we then instead, because I want to be able to change these numbers all at the same time, I'm going to click on this brightness value right here, and I'm going to click on that checkbox as well. So all I'm going to do now is change my tonal values, and I want you to watch what's happening to these three numbers. They are going to change, but they will all three equal one another. So as you start to drag up, you'll see I'm going to come up and I'm getting up to like, and you get this thing up here that says new color. That's the resulting color of what we're getting. This is now a neutral gray that's made from a 75, 75, 75 RGB value of that. Does that make sense? Right? And so it's kind of a darkish gray. If you wanted a perfect middle gray, exactly halfway between 0 and 255 by definition, it's a little tricky, but nonetheless, it's 128, or that's the way Photoshop defines it. This is now a middle gray, and you can see, yep, that looks like a middle gray. And as you continue to crank this up higher, we'll get up here into the, I'm at like a 206, a 206, a 206. That gives me a lighter gray. And then finally, when I go all the way up to the top, I end up with 255, 255, 255. That's maximum red, green, and blue, maximum intensity, but equal amounts. It is a neutral gray, but in our case, it's white. We call it white. So are we good on this? Scale, 0 to 255. In grayscale, that's it. In RGB, it's also combinations of that will generate any colors. Does that make sense?
Why do I need to know this?
We're getting ready to find out right now. So I'm going to cancel out of this. I'm going to come up to the image menu, down to adjustments, down to curves. And what you will notice, if you click on this curve thing at the very top up here, if you click to drag that point around, you get an input and an output reading that are right here at the bottom. And what do they say? 255. We have now grabbed the white point of this curve. As you start to pull it back in this direction, you'll see we're changing the input value. Right now I'm saying the input value of 128, which is a middle gray. I say I want that middle gray to be white and everything above it to be white. And that's why this whole image is going white. If you kick it and drag it all the way back to the end, your whole image goes white because you just said, I want to remap every tone in this image to be white. Does that make sense? So that's why this scale of 0 to 255 makes sense, so that you understand what it is you're doing here. You can do the opposite of that if you drag it all the way back to the right, and instead I'm going to grab the black point down here at the bottom and I'm going to drag it all the way up, and my image also goes white because again I'm remapping all of my outputs, which are 0 and up, to the white point. If I instead drag this slider all the way forward, my image goes completely black. If I can get it all the way forward. I can't get it all the way forward because it's holding out one level for me. It's saying I can't, well, I should be able to get beyond that. I'm going to see if it'll let me type in 255. I don't know if it'll let me drag it that way. Yeah, so it won't let me go any higher than 251, but you get basically the idea. What I'm saying is that everything from 251, which is almost pure white, to white, which is 255, I want to be black, which is my output, which is 0. So that's kind of the way curves work. If you grab something here in the middle and drag it up, you lighten your image. If you click on something here and you drag it down, you darken your image. If you tear off these points, so you can grab this point on the curve. I need everybody doing this with me, please. You can drag this off. You get rid of it. If you want to build contrast in this image, you can click at a point down here, and I'm going to click. You can see where these unions are, these like sort of the graph that's on here. Do you guys have a graph that's basically a 4x4 line? Mm-hmm. Okay, you can change the number of that if you want to, and you can do that by simply changing grid size right here if you need to be more precise, but I'll stay with the 4x4. If you click on a point that's right down here, this is sort of in the shadow area down here, click and drag it down. I've made my shadows darker. But then if I click up here in the highlights and drag up, I'm making my highlights lighter. And what I have done is I've actually added contrast to this image. I've made my darks darker and my highlights lighter. That's contrast, isn't it? I can still click on another point here in the middle and push it up to brighten my image up by opening up the midtones or making them darker. Basically how to really screw up your image. However, now that I've done this and I got my image looking really bad, I'm going to say okay to that. And you'll see in this case that it actually creates this as a smart filter, again, which is a good thing. I can't do destructive work on this. Does that sort of make sense? However, I'm going to throw this guy away. I am going to make, we're just going to go ahead and rasterize this smart object. We've done enough smart object work for right now. So I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this guy. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, down to rasterize. So it just becomes a normal guy. I'm going to do that very same move again. Up to the image menu, down to adjustments, down to curves. I'm going to put some wacky curve on this thing to really screw it up. Yeah, that looks pretty bad. And say okay to that. This is now no longer a smart filter. This is a destructive move. If I save this image right now, I would bake that adjustment into this image. So are you guys getting the whole concept of baking in? Okay, again, that's a destructive move. You can't recover from this. If this isn't the way you want your image to look, if you wanted to get back to normal, you couldn't do that. If you had saved this file and closed it up, there's no way to recover from this. So in our case, instead of doing that, I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do it in a non-destructive way. And it's the fourth icon across the bottom of the layers palette. And that fourth icon, if you click on it, you'll get a flyout menu. And in this flyout menu, you will see that you have all the controls that you actually had up here in image adjustment. So if we look back up at image adjustment up here, I had brightness levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, hue, saturation, all the way down, invert, posterize, threshold, gradient, all these kind of stuff down here till I get down to this selective color at the bottom. All of these also sit right here. They're the exact same things. The difference, though, is that these put on what are called adjustment layers. So if you add a curve to this, and you do that same, if properties is sitting right here, this is where you would change that. Do that same wacky curve thing in your properties or whatever to make it look weird like this. It's done it as a layer. This layer is protective because you can turn it off. It is not a destructive move. It gives you the illusion, but it is a non-destructive move. Does that make sense? Also, what is this guy right here? It is a layer mask. Now, we touched on masks really briefly last week. So what can you guys tell me about masks? What can anybody tell me about a mask? It controls what you see or don't see of a particular layer. That's exactly right. But it functions for adjustment layers as well. So in the mask space, what does white in a mask do? See, if I got this tattooed on my ass and I came in here and showed that to you guys next week, because I have really flat old man ass, it would be burned in your brain, wouldn't it? So try to remember this, because I really don't want to resort to that. I really don't. And you promise you don't. First time my wife ever looked at me and said, wow. No, anyway. So, white reveals, black conceals. That's what you need to think of. White reveals, black conceals. So to see what that means, we've done some really wacky color thing on this. If you hit the B key to get your brush, I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. Again, the size of your brush you can control in this drop-down menu right here. This is where you would control the size of your brush right here. The hardness of your brush is controlled right here. That's how hard the edge appears or how soft the edge appears. I'm going to leave mine at 100% hard. 200 pixels will be fine. To get rid of this flyout menu so that I can work on my image again, simply click on the name Adobe. It goes away. So I've got a brush right here. I'm going to hit, because white is my foreground color, I'm going to hit the X key to make black my foreground color, and then I'm simply going to start painting over the castle. And you can see that this area now that I'm painting over, it is being masked out. So this curve is affecting all of my image except where I've painted this black part. Does that make sense? Are we good on this? if I make my entire mask black, to make your entire mask black, the easiest way to do that is to simply come up to the edit menu. Again, the little brackets are around this, so I know that I'm working on this thing right here. Up to the edit menu, down to fill, and in the drop down menu for contents, I'm going to say black. I'm going to leave it as a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and say OK. It fills it with black, and now this curve is not affecting any of my image because I've got a mask that is hiding all of it. If I go back to my brush, the B key, hit the X key to get white as my foreground color, then I can come in here and I can start to paint white again in this area of my mask to then have the curve affect only this area.
And that's revealing the layer underneath, right?
It's revealing this curve.
Right.
It's not showing, the background always shows. This curve is only impacting the tonal range of the image that's underneath. How did I do what? I'm simply painting with white on this mask. Okay, yeah, so your mask is black. That's fine. So hit a brush, D key. Make sure that is selected. It is. Come over here and make sure you need to make sure that your foreground color is white. It is. And just paint. And what you're seeing is what the curve is doing in this area alone. And you can see it right here. I'll tell you, this will help you guys, I think. I need everybody to do this for me. I don't know why they don't make this permanent, but at any rate, come over, look at my screen really quick. Come over to the little flyout menu. We'll take a break in 10 minutes, guys, I swear to God. The little flyout menu that's sitting right here, click on that flyout menu, come down to Panel Options, and click on the big thumbnail and say OK. I'll show you the flyout menu. So the tab that says Layers, go all the way to the right. There's a little menu that sits right there. It's a little set of lines. Click on that menu. You'll get a drop-down menu. This is actually this controls everything that's in the Layers palette, including its options. So come down to the bottom of that and click on Panel Options. It'll open up, and if you click on the radio button by the large thumbnail, you'll get these larger thumbnails, and you can actually see the area of the mask that you're painting in. You can see the shape of it, and the shape right here of this white blob is identical to what's going on right here on my mask. Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to do one more here just to make sure you guys understand what's going on here. I'm going to throw this entire layer away, this adjustment layer. I'm going to grab the layer. I'm going to drag it to the garbage. It's the whole layer, not just the mask, but the whole layer. Then I'm going to put a different kind of adjustment layer on here because there's a whole series of these in here. If you click on this flyout menu and you come up, you'll see that one of them is black and white. If you click on that, it turns your image into a black and white image. You also have a layer mask on this. Did this work for everybody? Has everybody got a black and white image? Again, hit the B key to get a brush. Hit the X key if black is your foreground, was your background color. You need black to be your foreground color. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paint color back in on my image. Because again, what this adjustment layer did, the adjustment layer is making this image black and white. It's making it appear. If you turn off the eyeball, the image is still in color. It never changed. That's the advantage of using adjustment layers. But now I've got a layer mask that allows me to control where I do see the color and where I don't see the color. Where black and white, the black and white adjustment is actually happening and where it's not happening. Is this making sense to you guys? Are we good on this? It's an adjustment layer. I'll show you. I'll throw this one away again. It's that same half circle, half light, half dark circle. It's called black and white. So again, the thing about adjustment layers is twofold, guys. Number one, it's non-destructive. Number two, you get a mask, right? If you throw this away and instead you come up to your image menu, down to adjustments, down to black and white, and say, okay, how the fuck do you affect this? How do you change that? How do you say where you want this to be or not? That is a destructive move. You've just ruined your image if you save this. The color's gone. So how would you prefer to work in all of this? Is this making sense? Yeah. I am trying to give you, my whole life, I have spent growing up making sure that there was a back door or a side window for every single thing I've ever done in my life. especially with my family. And I apply that very same thing here. If you don't have to close a door, if you don't have to throw the lock on, why on earth would you ever do that? Why wouldn't you keep things always open and available for you to be able to change it? Does that make sense? That's why we deal with smart objects. That's why we deal with adjustment layers. Are we good on this? Okay, we're getting there, guys. Okay, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that because I don't want that to be a destructive move. However, we can do a couple things here really quick. I'm going to actually ask you to go ahead and make this black and white again. So using an adjustment layer, click on this, come up, and we are going to say black and white on that. Then we're going to add just a regular curve on top of this. Again, all these can be cumulative. So I'm going to add a curve on top of this. So again, another adjustment layer. Click on that and come up and add curves. And you won't see any change because we haven't remapped any tonality. So what I've got right here is a black and white adjustment layer that made everything black and white. And this one will allow me to remap the tonality of this guy. So I'm going to come up here now, and I'm actually going to click on the auto button to see what Photoshop thinks I should. Because if you click on auto, what it tries to do is give you as complete a tonal range as it can. That's what it's going to try to do. So we'll see what it does. I'm going to click on it, and it actually makes part of my mid-tone areas darker. That's what's actually going on here. So you can see that this thing becomes a cumulative effect. And again, you can turn the eyeballs on and off to see what's going on. It simply pumped up my blacks. It didn't think that those were rich enough. It didn't really do anything to the whites in my image at all. I, however, can go in and continue to change this. I can say, well, I want the whites to actually be brought down to more, I want it to be moodier or darker. Or I really want to blow the whites out completely. I want this to look like I don't know, an old photograph that was taken on orthochromatic film. Does this make sense? So these things can be cumulative. It doesn't have to be, you're not restricted to just a single layer. Are we good on that part? Okay, I'm going to show you one last thing. You can throw both of these guys away. We're going to do one more adjustment. We're going to actually do two more adjustment layers really quick, and then we'll take a break. So the first one I'm going to do is actually hue saturation. So if you click on hue saturation, it'll open up, and it'll, again, in properties is where you actually do all the shifting. And the shifting in here, I'm going to come down to the saturation slider, and I'm going to click on the saturation slider, and I'm going to crank it up. And this is my new fine art. Because that's a good look, I think. Don't you guys? Okay, so in Lightroom, you guys have saturation, but you've also got a vibrance slider, right? What's the difference?
Vibrance has to do with brightness. Doesn't saturation like give it more color? Kind of.
We're not there yet. Anybody else want to take a shot at it? Do I? Okay. Here's the deal. What saturation does, and you can see it's happening right here, it takes all colors and it makes them more saturated. It pushes them away from what we would consider to be grayed out or have complementary color in it, and it makes them more saturated. What vibrance does is it looks at the image and it says colors that are already saturated, we're going to leave those alone. We're only going to really impact colors that don't have a lot of saturation. So it ends up, they both push saturation, they both increase saturation, but one of them does it with a hammer and the other does it in a more judicial, in a more restricted way. Does that sort of make sense? So I'm going to turn off the eyeball. I don't have to throw it away, I can just turn it off. And then I'm going to add another one on top of that, and vibrance is what I'm going to add on top of it. And you can see up here when you get to vibrance, you'll see you have two sliders up here. I don't know why they give you saturation again, but they do. But at any rate, I'm going to click on vibrance and drag this guy up. And you can see what happens here is I've pumped up the color and the saturation in this, but there's nothing in here that was already saturated that I have now made, you know, nuclear neon fluorescent because I pushed the saturation too hard. Does that sort of make sense? So you can see, again, these things they're cumulative sliders. Again, I can add another curve on top of this and say, well, I like what the vibrance did, but now I'm going to see what Photoshop thinks I should do in terms of the tonality of this. And that just really makes my image look ugly. So if I say, okay, well, I don't want the cloud part. I don't like, what this part did to. I like what it did to the field, but I don't like what it did to the castle. Whatever. Again, I can click on the layer mask of this. Hit the B key to get a brush. Make sure that black is my foreground color. And if you're really good with a brush, you can actually come in here and you can paint all of that away. And now you've got something that's got vibrance completely on all of the image, but on terms of what that curve did for contrast, it's affecting the ground but not the castle. Are there questions about this? Are we good on this? So hopefully you guys are beginning to get some sense of the control that you've got in this. Can you do anything like this in Lightroom? No, not even close. And when we get into doing the retouching tools, that simply doesn't exist in Lightroom. Okay, guys, I've got 8 o'clock right now. If you can get back by quarter after, we are going to do everything we can to get through printing tonight. And don't close this image up. We'll still work with it one more time. We've got one more thing to look at.